I've been working UX design for over 15 years. I'm recently the founder and CEO of a business called Contentment, and we produce a platform called Padify, which is about app publishing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've seen and some projects that we've worked on. Most of our customers at the moment are magazine publishers doing app versions of their magazines or content from magazines. And I realise that's probably a relatively small part of what you do at RBI these days. But I think actually magazines are quite hard. I think we've learned a lot of interesting things by looking at magazines and how they've been making the transition to mobile.
There we go. You're the master.
That's working. Okay, we're good to go, are we? Excellent. Good stuff. All right. Get that thing out of the way. Great. Okay, fine. So I think we just covered that, in fact. So Padify is the platform, Contentment's the business. It's about providing a kind of tool set, a platform for creating content-based apps. I thought I'd step back a little bit. This is the IBM 1620, which is the first computer I ever used. And the way I programmed it back then was by getting a pencil and punching holes in one of these things. I should say this was a university. It was old kit in New Zealand. You know, I'm not actually that old, but that's where it started. The IBM 1620 wasn't actually even that large. As we know, back in the kind of dinosaur age of computers with these massive, massive boxes that kind of lived off somewhere in a server room somewhere, and you never sort of saw them. You were connected over miles of cable with a dumb terminal or something. But, you know, Moore's law, chips got smaller and faster, devices became smaller and smaller, became kind of nearer to us, but also the way that we use them, the patterns of using them changed. It stopped being something we just did at work. It started to be something we did at home as well, or in the cafe on our laptop, and until we kind of reached the point we are now, where, you know, it's in your pocket and it's with you all the time, and very, very frequently is switched on. And I think when we were those of us who were tackling this problem to start with, we really thought when smartphones started becoming a thing that the kind of key problem was going to be squashing stuff down. It was a design problem about fitting more content into a little screen. And we had some assumptions we never really thought through that kind of informed a lot of what we did, you know, that it was just this another screen size. We thought, and also nobody was going to read long content on a phone. That would never happen. And the thing about apps maybe being a fad, I think those of us who had invested a lot of kind of hope and passion and what have you in the web, we're a bit worried by apps. The apps looked like they were going to destroy all this kind of nice open stuff that we built, the open web platform, in favour of sort of walled garden app thing. But all those assumptions turned out to be wrong, I think it's fair to say. So just stepping back to the how you use them, and there are several reasons why it changed more than we expected, and I'm going to talk about those things. One of those things is this thing about being always with you and pretty much always on, this kind of intermittent, persistent connectivity. This is from Ofcom's Digital Day report earlier in the year, and you know, it turns out that consuming media is kind of what people do given the opportunity. Spend sort of half the day, that's the purple bit, engaged in media and comms activity. I kind of think about it, it's like the kind of global level of attention has gone up with the advent of mobile. It's like there was some huge ice shelf of attention somewhere that melted, and you know, that's, if you're in the kind of content business, that's pretty exciting. It means there is a sort of lot of opportunity out there. Another kind of interesting thing was this, that mobile introduced these touch-based interfaces, which remove this whole level of abstraction before, you know, I do kind of think when you look at using your desktop thing now, if you compare it with your phone, it's almost like pulleys and levers and rubber bands, you know. You're kind of moving your mouse over here and this thing's moving over there, and there's this, mobile took that away, removed a kind of level of abstraction there that you just actually directly manipulate things, you touch them and move them. So that created, I think, a much more emotional connection with our devices. You know, most people feel much more warmly about their mobiles than they probably ever felt about their desktop PC. And the third thing is get kind of odd. There's the massive constraints that were introduced by these screens, by these mobile screens. Not only a tiny screen, but also this big fat pointing device, you know, that actually is not very granular. And then a limited range of interactions you can do with it as well. You know, there's no right clicking or hover or any of this thing. It's just this big thunking great finger Some of you might have finer fingers than me, I don't know, but in my case, it's quite clumsy, quite a clumsy pointing mechanism. That turned out to be a really good thing, I think, bizarrely. I mean, what it did was it really sort of forced the pace on user-centered design. Maybe a lot of things that UX theorists have been thinking about for a long time, suddenly we kind of had to do them to get it to work at all in this kind of constrained, this starved environment. It turned out the things that work very, very well on mobile are things that present simple user journeys, that it's kind of one thing at a time, that there's this whole kind of level of craft that we had on the web that goes away. And it's just this much more goal-focused, often successful apps, often single-purpose apps. So they do one thing and they do one thing well. And Apple helped this process along, I think, in a couple of ways. I think they helped it along by introducing some kind of quality threshold with the App Store. That was sort of useful, as much as sort of hate it as developers occasionally, and rewarded, good behavior, good design by promoting through their kind of very small shop front. So, they drove this process forward to some extent. And this is why people like apps. And why do people like apps? Is we're up to what on the Apple App Store alone, like 80 billion downloads or something at this point. These things combined, I think, are this thing that we don't even think of our smartphones as computers. Nobody thinks they're carrying around a computer in their pocket. It's what they've become really is appliances. That your phone is an appliance, not a computer. And those, what do you see when you look at the screen? It's like a row of buttons. The apps are buttons that activate these simple tasks, that activate these focused journeys, these kind of small, well-defined things. Jim Barksdale, ex-CEO of Mozilla, very quotable man. Some quotes better than others. I like this one. There's only two ways to make money in business. One is to bundle, the other is to unbundle. And mobile is very much about unbundling. I should say I'm talking about that in the context of apps specifically. I mean, you can very easily, and it's probably a good idea, have a sort of wider bundling strategy of which the unbundled apps are part of the broader strategy. This is from the Mary Meeker's Internet Trends report earlier in the year, talking about talked about the same thing, about how that mantra. There's an app for that. Our first ventures from the desktop into mobile apps. So the Facebook app was like a do everything app. It was just taking that web experience and squishing it into a smaller screen. And actually, this whole range of new apps have come along that are much more focused and much more single purpose, that are kind of smaller and more defined. And in a way, in this context, your browser is probably the crappiest app on your phone. It's quite complicated. You get very inconsistent experiences. This site needs mobile optimizing, I have to say. And there's a lot of navigational craft in it and so forth. It's not a great experience. And digging that, there's a kind of design element around that, a UX design element around that. I think we think about how we deal with website design. There's generally this approach where there's a lot of navigation on a page. There's content is somewhere in the middle, and there's top nav and bottom nav and side navs and related links and all this kind of navigational things. And you actually before that even there's probably a home page. My God, how many web design meetings I sat in where people are worried about the priority things on the home page. And the way you as a consumer navigate around that is you're tapping through to one place, and then maybe you go back to the home page and you choose something else, or maybe you follow a related link or whatever. But you're constantly having to make these navigational decisions, negotiate your way through this kind of network of content, which is very powerful, it's got to be said. In the mobile, but compare this with the mobile experience. So for content-based apps, this navigational paradigm has sort of evolved over time, I suppose, which is really very, very simple. It's about swiping left or right to explore what's available, and scrolling up or down, scrolling down below the fold, if you like, when you want to kind of engage. And everything else, that stuff that we don't have room for on the screen anymore, we stick that behind a hamburger somewhere. It's all that, the stuff that's going to shift context completely, take it off the screen. So there's this one thumb user journey. There's a one thumb, find something I like, look at it, engage with it. So I think when we think about mobile, these linear journeys are kind of quite important and quite interesting to think about. It's something we never thought about on the web. When you're designing a website, you never think about the linear user journey. And it does give you this real scope, because when someone's going down, okay, we've got them, they're interested, we can kind of run with that, but they can always skip on as well. Quite good for advertising too, because it makes the whole interstitial advertising thing is just one thumb to get rid of it if you're not interested, but if you are interested, there's that space. In this context, I know print designers in particular who come to, because we're dealing with magazines, we have a lot of print designers involved in it, they kind of still want to fit things to pages. And of course, there's no such thing as a responsive page, fixed size page. Every device has got a different sort of page size, and you can't fit the same content in different screen sizes. That's just math. It's not that it's hard; it's that it's impossible. But actually, the scrolling adds real value. That is part of what makes the mobile experience so great, is having that extra axis. That doesn't mean, so I was dissing the web browsers then, doesn't mean the web isn't here, but again, I think the web has been abstracted away a little bit, that in most mobile apps, or many of them, are connecting to the web in one way or another, that the web is an infrastructure layer that they're kind of sitting on top of and making use of. The way we approach this, and I think a very good way of approaching it, is our hybrid apps, where we try and minimize the amount of code that you have to write for each platform, and all the stuff that we're regularly producing, in our case mostly content, is in the HTML layer, that we can just push in at whatever frequency you like into a kind of container app shell, this hybrid app model. I'm a big fan of HTML5 and everything it can do, but the fact is, if we're talking about portable content, it kind of doesn't matter even if it's really good. It's really the only game in town. There's no sensible alternative anyway, so we might as well roll with it. But there are lots of great things about it as well. One of those that's quite interesting is the interactivity side. So the early magazine apps, I don't know if anyone remember Wired when it came out on the iPad or whatever, it was just like absolutely stuffed full of spinning and whizzing things and so on, and it felt like all that interaction was just gimmickry to some extent. And I think again, there's been that process of discovery about finding out what works and how you can usefully use the tool set that's kind of available to you. And I just wanted to pick out kind of two things there. One is about signaling. With your big fat finger, it's very easy to press the wrong thing and be not quite sure what happened. Animation in particular has a big place to play in making the user journey visible and showing what just happened. I tap on my little thing here and I see an animation shows me where I went. So there was a moment where I could see it unfolding in front of me, and that the user journey is more visible, and I sort of know how to go back. Even simple things like in magazine apps where we're kind of swiping from one page to another, and we know that we can swipe back the other way and get back to where we were. And I think the other thing is about filtering. So again, this kind of small space, how do we present a lot of information inside it by using things like photo galleries and popovers and drawers and things like this. If we use them carefully, really it's about creating user choice, about the user deciding, are we interested in this particular piece of content? Do I want to explore that more? Am I going to move on? So actually data is a very interesting area to consider in this. That there's a big difference between, say, taking a big table of data and making it merely readable and making it usable on a phone. It could be readable and there's still hundreds and hundreds of rows, and what use is that? How do we make that actually something that's functional as well? And filtering techniques play a big part in that, I think. So let's think a little bit about how people use their devices as well. So I'm sure we've all seen you can't actually stand on wait for a bus or a train or something without every single other person around you is looking at their phone. So that, pick it up, I've got 5 minutes to kill, what happens? Well, what happens, again, thinking more in the context of magazine apps, but I think there's a more broader question, what happens when I push that button for my app? Well, in most cases for digital magazines, what happens is we see the shop front. We see a list of the back issues that we could purchase if we wanted to. I mean, my God, you would never do that in print. It's like that would be the last page of the issue, and instead, very, very often, it's the first thing is this kind of list of back issues. And if I look tomorrow, I'll see that same list. And in fact, if we stick with a monthly publication model, there's only kind of one day a month I'm going to be guaranteed to get anything fresh when I open up my magazine app. Now, that's a bit crazy, isn't it, when you think about how people are actually using their devices, that persistent connectivity. Some publications tried moving to a kind of weekly digital cycle for their monthly editions, and that does improve engagement and so on. And the logical place we end up is with more of a continuous publishing model where you're pushing out updates every day or as frequently as you can manage. For print publications, there are big workflow challenges about how you deal with that and how you reconcile your print publication cycle with a kind of more frequent digital publishing cycle. But it is more effective how people really use their devices. And it's worth bearing in mind, of course, other types of software have really changed when they went to mobile, and games are a great example. That the kinds of games that dominate the mobile charts are not traditional console games. And the audience has grown while that process happened, and I think that is again a function of a focus on user-centered design. These games appeal to a broader set of users. One of the other interesting things that we've seen is, or that we think is kind of a really useful technique in mobile is cards. Which is a way of breaking content down into smaller chunks of design content that we can use sort of semi-independently or independently. And there are a number of advantages around this. First of all, doing cross-platform design is quite hard, so it takes this big problem and breaks it down into smaller chunks. And the cards give us a kind of way to design around content in a way that would be harder if we were doing, as we often do in the web, kind of whole page templates. And they're kind of reusable, and through things like Open Graph and Twitter card markup as well, they become a kind of unit of sharing, which is sort of quite useful. And just very briefly, I think designers often don't have to think about workflow, but really this is particularly true in the magazine space. But I think if we're thinking about kind of lots of different target devices that we're trying to get to, the workflow part is even more important than it ever was. You could just about get away with somebody, when you're in print, say, you only had to fit to that one page size. You could just kind of do it by hand, and that was all right. When we've got this huge range of things that we need to publish to, that's not really a practical approach. So I do think I could do a really long talk about the whole workflow side, but I'm not going to do that today. Okay, so I'll just talk about a few recent projects that we've worked on. So as I said, mostly magazine apps is where it ended up being for one reason and another. And they're kind of hard they have very complex and idiosyncratic layouts, and they rarely have any sort of CMS or structured data or semantics to speak of behind them. They're coming from print assets, and usually we've got a tiny little tight window to try and turn it around in as well. So, I think those are all good things. Certainly it's been good for us as platform developers to have to meet these hard challenges and make a platform that can deliver on these things, that can deliver fast turnaround and creativity and etc. But also there is this kind of interruptible content and so on. And in a way, magazines should be doing much better in mobile than they are so far. I think because so few have actually done it. Most of the digital editions we see are PDF replicas. And they haven't rethought the experience, and they haven't thought about the different kind of use case. Actually, magazine content for consumer magazines is about stuff people care about, or they wouldn't be reading in the first place. And for business magazines, it's about it's stuff that's to do with their work or with their job, or this is stuff. It should be easy to compete with the Flappy Bird or the Angry Bird or whatever bird it is. It shouldn't actually be a hard challenge to succeed in that space, I think. Okay, here's one I want to briefly talk about. We've done work on with Time Inc. Actually, they originally did it as an Adobe DPS magazine. They're just migrating to Padify now, but I think it's an interesting project. It's a 5.2 recipe app. Is anyone on the 5.2? Anyone want to own up? It's the most hideous thing. So anyway, so it's got all these recipes that are taken from across the range of from one of their women's titles. But they're just pulling out that recipe content and putting it in a single app. So it is a sort of unbundled proposition about really focusing on this single thing. I'm doing the 5.2 diet, I've got my 300 calorie a day allowance or whatever it is. What can I eat? Nothing, it turns out. We're going to be releasing additional packs of content around that. I was thinking the other day, I wonder if they're going to do a kind of Christmas pack, but you couldn't, I don't think. I don't think you could do 5-2 Christmas. Here's another one kind of similar in a way. This for Search Press, who are a kind of crafts publisher. They have this huge range, a big backlist of books about crafts of various kinds, from knitting to making little polymer bears. That's quite popular one, in fact. And with this app, it's not live yet. Will be soon. You can actually buy individual patterns. So something that in the print edition, each pattern is a page. Here, we've turned that into a kind of monetizable unit by itself. And there's obviously lots of different ways you could do this. We could have it that we're starting off with just buying individual patterns, but we could sell bundles of them. You could get subscriptions. There's various ways you could mix and match revenue around these patterns within this sort of single app. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes. And this one, I really like this one. The long and the short is a new digital-only magazine about innovation that we've just done with Nesta, and it's using this what they call a seasonal publication model, where every 2 months they launch a new themed season with a batch of stories about that, and then over the rest of the season, over the next couple of months, new stories get published every day or every other day. And those are a mix of long, quite intensely researched feature pieces. Somebody has flown off to Germany and researched recycling or something. And just really short pieces, which could be, they're recipes and little film reviews and things like that. So it's quite a sort of eclectic mix. I think it's a really nice example of looking at the kind of continuous publishing models. So there's the kind of brief summary then of what I've been talking about. I think that shift to mobile is much more profound than maybe we initially thought, even that I initially thought when I started working in it, that I think it is about these different usage patterns have got a sort of profound impact on how we do UX and what are the types of experiences we have to deliver. That more focused, simpler use cases work really well. If you think of the phone as an appliance and your app is a button, what does it do as something simple, and more of those is better. And that continuous publishing cards are things that work quite well. One last thought. My God, Google Glass is rubbish, isn't it? They're absolutely clunky and stupid, and I'm not buying the Apple Watch either. But of course, I don't know if you remember when the first mobile phones, which were just for kind of yuppie wankers, really. I mean, there was a huge kind of box, and they're rubbish. You were never going to own one, right? So I do worry that we might miss an opportunity here, and that I think this is a way and a continuation of that story from the mainframe through to the desktop to the laptop to the, and I think that wearables is the kind of logical next step on that, and it's something we should all be sort of thinking about. Okay, has anyone got any questions about any of that?
Who's doing good apps at the moment?
It's a very broad question, isn't it? Well, where my particular focus is on the magazine space is actually, it is a bit, it's not great, I have to say, that I think very few people are doing anything interesting. In fact, I've just been ploughing through a whole lot for an awards thing I'm judging. It's a bit depressing. Yeah.
Maybe I can help that question, which is, have you seen any publishers move from print to the app space and actually seen that transform their business in any way? Even if you're not happy with the actual app itself.
Some people are doing quite well on it. The Week is a title that we work with at Dennis Publishing, and I think they've done really well on doing a kind of bundled strategy with print plus digital. Their proposition lends itself quite well anyway, because it was a sort of aggregation thing, and that's making pretty good money. So there are things out there that are working. Yeah.
I suppose the key question is why aren't publishers doing this better up until now?
It's kind of challenging, to be fair. Because you've got to keep the presses running and still do the print stuff. There's a lot of resource constraint. It's certainly true that the first solutions into the market from the vendor perspective, things like Adobe Digital Publishing Suite, were so focused on the iPad that they can't even really deliver mobile without you doing it again. So it was about not having the tools to hand. And I think all of us, it was a bit of learning to be done and about realizing, oh, there are actually different use cases here that we have to think through.
You need people creating the content to be thinking about it as well.
Did you work with any business magazines, or is it mostly consumer stuff?
We're actually beginning to make some inroads in the space, but somewhat to my surprise. Money Week were the first that we signed that it's a little bit in the business space, I suppose, it's kind of hybrid. And Vitesse are a customer at the moment, so we're doing the kind of what investor and information age and things like that. And we're talking to you guys too.
No, I was just wondering if there are any particular challenges that you face or any completely different behaviors that you see.
I think one of the really interesting things about dealing with data on mobile, which hasn't been done very well, I think it's kind of fair to say, and we've got some work in progress about looking at that. Things like, I was talking about the difficulties of navigating big tables of data. So a lot of business titles will have these tables of data that are repeated in every, with different values, if you like. So we're looking at things like, can we deep favorite into tables, that there are only these particular rows of a table that I'm interested in. Say if I'm an investor, there might be particular stocks I want to follow. And then in next month's edition, we show, we can pull out just my favorite data, if you like. Also thinking about how, what we can do with infographics and charts and so forth on mobile, which I think is a two-step thing. First, readable. Maybe I can navigate a data point at a time on a chart. Or a bubble diagram or something, but then usable, how to actually find the ones that I want. So there's this kind of interesting space that in consumer isn't that important a thing. Okay.
Are you finding, sorry, I just had a question, are you finding that clients are doing much testing specifically on their apps? Because I know you mentioned the week, and I think they were one that spent quite a lot on the UX testing and also maybe the Guardian, but I think a lot of other people are maybe not considering it as a separate enough experience and just kind of rushing to market with it.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I kind of can't speak to that too much. I mean, I have to be honest, there's a lot of publishers I speak to that we're selling technology in the end, not product strategy, and really they need to go away and sort out the product strategy first and think these things through and do some more corridor testing, what have you, before they lead through to a solution. But I think there are resource problems around it more than anything else. Anything else? Okay. Thanks.